This is Steve Laffey's Fixing America. And now, broadcasting live from the Fixing America Command Center in Fort Collins, Colorado, here is your host, Steve Laffey.
Good afternoon, America. Steve Laffey here. Great to be back with you again. Steve Laffey's Fixing America live, LaffeyRadio.com. Follow us on Twitter, Laffey Radio. Like us on Facebook and make some comments on Facebook. Send us some questions. Laffey Radio. It's a great day here in Fort Collins. The sun is out. The cold weather is lifting, although I guess in some parts of the country is still. We talked about this global warming stuff yesterday, or lack thereof. And science people studying global warming or for global warming stuck on boats and can't get off. But today we're back. It's sunny out. It's beautiful here today. We've had a great morning here. Kids are back in school in many respects, being homeschooled. No one's got the flu, and we've got a big topic here for you today. I mean, it's really one of the biggest topics that we do cover, and it really is about this budget or lack thereof, and the games that are being played in Washington at such a level that it's incomprehensible now to the American public. Even when I start to research the budget deal that was passed after Congressman Ryan and U.S. Senator out of Washington, Murray, who worked, they said, hard together and complement each other, and this is a step in the right direction, and it's at least something, and blah, 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 blah. It's really nothing. And it's actually worse. And we'll go through how this came about, but literally, we have a country that takes in $3 trillion on average and spends $3.7 trillion on average, estimates over the next, say, 7-10 years. And we're running $700 billion plus deficits. They came down from $1.5 trillion to $750 trillion last year. No one estimates them to be below, significantly below, no matter what they use for GDP growth, to be below $500 billion for more than a year, let's say, over the next 10 years. And they're going to balloon back up because of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and so forth. We have a government that today, and I'm a strong national defense guy. You've heard my shows on national defense. I'm not Rand Paul. I'm not trying to bring home a traitor from Russia and give him half a year in jail. It's just a non-serious issue for Senator Paul and his father. I'm a serious guy on national defense. We need a strong national defense. Need to spend our money wisely, unlike what we've been doing for the last 10 years. We do need to spend a lot of it. But we spend a lot more today, adjusted for inflation, than we ever did when the Reagan administration built up to a 600-ship Navy to combat the growing influence of the Soviet Union and finally defeat the Soviet Union. So that was the last, head-to-head, without a real war, without a fighting war, that most Americans would look back and say, yeah, that was done for the right reason. Some people would say, when we built it up, it was unnecessary. I don't know how they can prove themselves to be right. We don't know how to prove them wrong. But we have a situation where we're spending $600 billion plus. So let's take a step back in this first section here. How did we get to this budget deal? Well, first it was something called sequestration, if I'm pronouncing that right. And many people are still confused by sequestration. It was part of the Budget Act of 2011 that basically said if you don't get your act together by 2013, there's going to be certain cuts in not Social Security, not Medicare, not Medicaid, but in about $1.1 trillion of discretionary spending, but including defense. There's going to be automatic cuts, not absolute cuts, but cuts from the growth of the budget. And they're going to average, $100-some-odd billion a year. Okay. That actually went into effect in March of 2013. And you might remember, and I have some documents here to talk about how the Congressional Budget Office told the world that it would cut 0.6% out of GDP growth for the year, and that GDP growth for the year would now average 1.4%, not 2%. Of course, sequestration went in. And there was this, you might remember, the world was about to end. America couldn't really function. Go back and read the stories back in February, March of 2013. Well, that's not what happened. The economy, by the way, grew at 4% in in the third quarter of this year. Now, there's a lot to that. And I don't get into these conversations just to take one number by one quarter. It gets very complicated, a lot of inventory buildup that's probably not going to continue, and people think that the economy in the fourth quarter is going to grow at about 2%. And actually, with the government shutdown that we had for 16 days in October, since when everybody told you that that would take GDP growth down, it's actually since that time been raised up 0.1% from 1.9 to 2%. Another showing that shutting the government down did not cause a massive recession, although if you go back and read the articles, it would have. So sequestration went through the year. There were these automatic cuts. And so what happened? Well, especially defense lobbyists, they had to have more money. And they're a very strong industrial complex lobbying group in America. Just go to Washington, D.C., see who's got the money, see where the richest zip codes in America are, see where they work. A lot of them work for defense contractors, lobbyists for defense contractors. So they decided that they couldn't even live within this, but they couldn't live within the sequestration. So they put together a budget deal. Now, if I were to tell you that even though we're running $800 billion deficits every year, and that the national debt is scheduled to go up by another $7 trillion between now and 2023. And I told you I went into a room and I'm going to save you over those 10 years $23 billion out of the $7 trillion additional debt. I've got my HP cell. I can't even do the calculation is like, it's not 1%, it's 0.1 of 1%. It's nothing. That'd be like saying, listen, in this negotiation that you needed me to get, 10 grand. I got you $6. It's so small. And yet it was greeted by the mainstream media, if we call it the mainstream media, by people who are good writers, people like Peggy Noonan, a Reagan Democrat in the Reagan administration, calling it a small step in the right direction. A whole article where, I had great respect for the lady and a lot of her writing. She clearly doesn't understand budgets, admits she doesn't understand budgets, and has it out there for the world to see as like, now we can get our act together. So $23 billion, but it's worse than that. If I told you that beholden to nobody, I was going to spend $60 billion more over the next 2 years, but don't worry, I'm going to get that money back for you in 2022 and 2023, 10 years from now, 9 years from now. You'd kick me out of the office. You'd say, what are you talking about? Is there a contract for that? I mean, is it discounted with some discounted cash flows to adjust for interest rates and inflation? I'd be like, no. Does anybody beholden to do this? Will they stick with the deal? No, they never do. That's what I said. They never do. They just change stuff because we elect congressmen every 2 years, senators every 6 years, and a third of them get replaced or run every 2 years. And none of these people, except John McCain and a couple of guys that probably still be sticking around, but these people won't necessarily be here. So no, there's no indication that we'll get those savings back at all. And the savings come from more sequestration that takes place in 2022 and 2023. So has this been presented to the American people by Paul Ryan and Senator Murray, and by others, by most people, by the way? 169 Republicans in the House of Representatives out of 200 and some odd voted for this budget deal. Like 69 voted against it. The Republicans were simply scared about another government shutdown because they thought that they lost politically on that issue. They think it's a step in the right direction. Either they don't understand the magnitude of the problem, that we really can't add this much debt onto the backs of our children, or they simply don't care. Now, Paul Ryan, I've been through Paul Ryan, career politician out of Wisconsin, probably a great guy to play basketball with. Looks like he's in great shape, works out 3 or 4 hours a day in that house gym room. They talk about how low body fat they have. Amazing what these people really don't do. They all had to get this budget done, by the way, before they could go home for Christmas. So they voted on it. There were like 30, 6 Republicans in the Senate who voted against it and like 9 who voted for it, something like that. But it does nothing. In fact, what I want to go through, this is going to take some time. We need to go through the budget itself. And nobody does this. And I know this, and by the way, this is where maybe we lose people. Maybe people don't want to hear the actual numbers. But here they are. Got a $3.7 trillion expenses. The impact on the deficit next year, $3.1 billion. Now remember, I'm saying trillion and billion. Year 2, $3.4 billion. $4.5 billion. Goes on and on and on. Only now in 2022 and 2023, $20 billion and $26 billion. Here's where that comes from. This is called budget enforcement. And listen to, I'm just going to read you one paragraph. There's like 5 of these. The legislation also would extend the automatic spending reductions applied to certain mandatory spending accounts through 2023. Those reductions are currently in effect through 2021. The legislation required that sequestration percentage applied to non-exempt mandatory accounts in 2021. They will be continued and applied in the same manner in 2022 and 2023. CBO estimates that extending those spending reductions for non-exempt mandatory programs for 2 additional years would decrease direct spending by $28 billion over the 2022-2023 period. So basically, sequestration comes back into play 9 years from now. You're going to hear people on clips. We're going to go to a break. We'll come back. But you're going to hear people talk about all the great things this does. Prevention of waste, fraud, and abuse. It's going to be about $1.9 billion. You mean they wouldn't? By the way, why is this part of a budget? They wouldn't do this anyway? What does it have to do with the budget? Natural resources. They're going to make changes to federal oil and gas programs. That's going to reduce spending by $4.5 billion over 10 years. So $450 million a year. Federal, civil, and military retirements. And I'm going to talk a lot about this. Legislation makes non-active duty or people that are working within the military increase their contributions by 1.3% of pay after January 1st of 2014. And it reduces for military retirees under the age of 62 by 1% per year their cost of living adjustment. Many of these people, by the way, and we love our military, but have retired you can retire after 20 years and you can be 38 years old. And by the way, there's been a lot of protests by the military, and we're going to talk about this budget. Higher education, saving, something to do with student loans, $300 million a year roughly. Transportation, they're actually going to charge taxes more on plane flights. Basically, just so you know that, $13 billion. That's where they're going to get the money from. Of course, they still hear people say there's no taxes, no tax increases. You're taxing people to fly in airplanes. And then there's some miscellaneous provisions that add up to about nothing, customs and borders protections and so forth. So that's it. That's basically it. And when you take the magnitude of the problem, that we're over $17 trillion in debt, and you take the non-serious people that we have in Washington who have totally abandoned, especially the Republican Party. The Democratic Party was never into this. They really didn't give up hardly anything. All they gave up in that budget really was the fact that they wanted to extend unemployment benefits for 2 years when as of December 31st, it was going to go back to the normal 26 or 30, whatever, 40 weeks, whatever it was. And by the way, we'll get into that because this budget was signed 2 weeks ago. So I waited a couple of weeks until we did a real show on this. Why? We figured there'd be some changes. They're already backtracking on 2 major parts of the budget. They're not waiting till 2015. They're backtracking on it now, 2 weeks later. These bums have to go. They all got to get out of office. We've got to get them out of office, and we've got to do more than just this show to get them out of office. But people have to rise up. It's Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We're talking about the budget disaster that was passed in the middle of December, about December 17th, so that people could home for Christmas. We're at LaffeyRadio.com. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
I'm always up for a challenge. It's the feeling of accomplishment that drives me. And there's no better challenge than serving part-time in the Coast Guard Reserve. I protect my country, work with the best and brightest. I get great pay and benefits in return. The Coast Guard Reserve is important work. I get to serve my community, and it's always rewarding.
If you were born ready, there's a new challenge waiting for you. Learn about serving part-time at gocoastguard.com/reserve.
This is Nnamdi Asamoah. I play football for the Philadelphia Eagles, but what I do off the field with United Way might be more important. I'm a volunteer tutor and mentor. Why? Because over 1 million kids a year drop out of school, and that's not okay. It takes 12 years to create a graduate, but it takes about the same time to create a dropout. And the difference between a child becoming one or the other could be me, or it could be you. Studies show that if we get to these kids earlier, their chances are better. And kids who read well by 3rd grade are more likely to graduate. So join me in United Way. Suit up and take the pledge. Become a volunteer reader, tutor, or mentor. Because when a child succeeds, we all succeed. Give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Take the pledge at unitedway.org. Brought to you by United Way, the Ad Council, and the National Football League.
Picture this, your next trip, Utah, 5 national parks. First, Zion. You're walking, the ground rises, the ground drops, the ground becomes water. Next, Bryce. You're riding a mule. You're riding a mule under giant orange strip castles. You are not dreaming. You will not forget this. On to Capitol Reef. Take the scenic route, the really scenic route. Take a path you've never taken and see the stars for the first time. Now for Canyonlands. You're riding a bike. You're riding a bike on Mars. Now you're riding the rapids. Class 2, Class 3, Class 4, Classic. Arches, 5:32 a.m. Some things are worth racing the sunrise for. The horizon lightens. You round the corner. Whoa. This is Life Elevated. The Mighty 5. 5 iconic parks, 1 epic experience. Plan your trip at visitutah.com.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
Good evening. I am happy to report that Senator Murray and I have reached an agreement. We've been talking all year, and this week that hard work of the two of us sitting down and talking to each other all year has paid off. First, it started because we passed budgets, and Senator Murray deserves credit for passing a budget through the Senate. That got the ball rolling so that the two of us started talking. And the reason we're here tonight is to explain what we've agreed to. This bill reduces the deficit by $23 billion, and it does not raise taxes, and it cuts spending in a smarter way. From the outset, we knew that if we forced each other to compromise a core principle, we would get nowhere. That is why we decided to focus on where the common ground is.
Or after hearing that first segment, your blood should be boiling. That's Paul Ryan talking about how he and Senator Murray out of Washington have worked all year long. They've been talking all year long. They decided that they couldn't get what they wanted, so everybody should be happy. They're happy to report this. They're not raising taxes. They went to where the common ground was. So let's go back over what the common ground was. This is the common ground that they found. They found in a $3.7 trillion budget. We just saw that Senator Tom Coburn put out a report about $100 billion in waste that goes on that could easily be cut, that everybody should have common ground on. Here's the common ground. Reduced waste and fraud, $1.9 billion. Energy provisions, including drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, $4.5 billion over 10 years, not next year. Federal and military retirement, $12.6 billion. Cuts to student loans, $5.1 billion. Aviation and shipping fees, it's taxing you to fly, $13.6 billion. Custom fees, $6.7 billion. Pension benefit guarantee premium, $7.8 billion. Defense spending going up by $63 billion over the next 2 years, and most of these cuts are not cuts at all. Most of this spending that they put into is not discounted even to account for inflation. So under sequestration, would have had a much better deal. We would have had continual. I mean, we should have done. We got to do much more than that. But under sequestration, we would continue to have all this money being versus the growth that it was going to be cut this year and next year and the year after. So when Paul Ryan says that this is what they could agree upon, this is what philosophically Republicans and Democrats could agree upon, it's nothing. They've done nothing with Social Security, nothing with Medicare, nothing with Medicaid. Increased defense spending from 150 adjusted for inflation over what was spent during the Reagan buildup to defeat the Soviet Union. It's ludicrous, And we got to stop playing some clips. I know because I'll never get some great clips here, but you could take any one of these things. I mean, in fact, look at how non-serious people are. Nancy Pelosi told her constituent, just suck it up and vote for this bad deal. And she was all over this thing about unemployment benefits, which are not in that budget. They didn't extend them in that budget. And what they really did was push this whole disaster out another 2 years to say 2015, because that's when this budget goes through, till October of 2015. Listen to Nancy Pelosi. Look how unserious her and a guy from the news just sort of yakking it up. This is the day of the budget deal.
So this morning you told your members, embrace the suck. That's a quote.
Yes.
That's a quote.
That's a quote, yes.
Before I get to the substance of the bill, where did you get that from?
I think it really captured the moment. Wouldn't you think?
Oh, I'm not criticizing it. It seems to sum up what you think of this legislation.
Well, it's not just the legislation, it's the whole process and the fact that we don't have unemployment insurance and those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, we need to have a budget. So what we decided was that our approach would be to...
You're not going to say it to me? Embrace the suck. Okay.
Yeah.
These people are so non-serious. The debt on, and we're talking about just the regular debt in the country, the one we normally talk about. We're not talking today about the $211 trillion of debt that is really out there. That's the coming expenses versus the projected revenue flows for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and so forth. It's over $200 trillion, according to Larry Kotlikoff, and we've got to get on the show at some point soon. Senior economist out of Boston University, who's widely cited for the data he provides on this subject, along with Social Security. He's a genius on Social Security. I was with him a couple of weeks ago just talking about Social Security. But we got to get him on to talk about the bigger problem. But how do they laugh and joke about this? It is because, I guess, in their world, because of gerrymandered districts like the one Nancy Pelosi has, and the power that they have, and the people that they report to in Washington, not the people out here in America, and the people out here in America feeling so hopeless that they can't even pay attention to what I'm talking about. It is, when someone hears this show and says, what? I didn't hear it that way before. It's $23 billion over 10 years with all the savings basically coming in 2022 and 2023. When we elect congressmen every 2 years with 1 year budgets that they don't even do, well, we know that they're going to go out and do away with those savings. So basically, they just gave $63 billion more to the military. That's the budget. That's the 2 year budget deal that most Republicans in the House voted for, 169 versus 62. There was only 62 Republicans left in the House of Representatives that said, no, we're not doing this. 62. So all the Democrats voted for it, I guess. And when you break down what's in this budget, which we've done, and we should do again, just because just repeating it makes you it makes you aghast. There's only one word for it. You're aghast. You're beyond surprised. You're aghast that the people we elected to keep this republic going strong are so non-serious that they will literally do this to our children. That for years and years, and now it'll be longer. It'll be out till 2017 before they get to it. I mean, here's another example, by the way, and we have another clip I want to play. It's the people in the stock market, because they're doing really well. Because the Fed is really, we've done a show about the wealth effect and about how the Fed feels about this and why they're keeping rates so low and why they're basically running up the risk, and they don't have the guts to tell the people in Congress, no, you do your job. We're not going to keep doing this and printing money for you. We're not doing now they're down to $75 billion a month of buying bonds and other assets to keep longer term interest rates lower than they normally would be. But listen to a money manager at Gamco Money Management describe what her thoughts on the budget. I don't know if she has any kids. I don't know if she has any nieces. I don't know much about her. But this is a typical money manager response to this budget deal.
Washington, you're not saying in the sense that Ben Bernanke and the Fed were rolling the printing presses 24/7, but you're saying Congress actually was getting along at the end of the year.
Well, yes, on the day of the taper, the market boomed, but I think that reaction in the market was partially set. The springboard was sort of set by the day before there was the announcement that Paul Ryan and Patty Murray had come to a bipartisan budget agreement, which of course is totally the opposite of what we've seen at the end of the previous 2 years. And I think there's all of a sudden some optimism that if the government can at least, if not function well together, get out of the way of causing these disruptions and economic uncertainties, then you could actually have a stronger economy over the next year or so. One of the big reasons for the, lackluster recovery has been the unwillingness of corporations to spend and invest and hire because they lack confidence. So if you could...
So it's really nonsense. I mean, the statistics, what she talks about, the last 2 years where I guess Congress ended without a budget, as she's trying to imply, the stock market went up 30% last year. So she's talking about one day. So here's a serious money manager who I wouldn't let manage any of my money, talking gibberish. Certainly businesses have faced this uncertainty, but she thinks that this budget agreement lets people know that the government's sort of getting out of the way. I just read you statistics one after the other. What are they getting out of the way of? There's far more regulation coming in. We could do a whole show. Maybe we'll do it next week about how many more pages of regulation have been entered into Congress over the last year. So they're not getting out of the way. They're not doing anything to increase confidence. Why would a business owner, why would someone who's running a business, which I've helped run one before, why would anybody have more confidence with these people coming out and talking like this? I wouldn't. Why does she think that people would? It makes no sense at all. Especially I guess she didn't mention, we don't know her feelings, but the Federal Reserve is certainly not gotten out of the way. It's created, that by itself I think we're going to talk about this tomorrow. That by itself has created enormous uncertainty because pretty smart businessmen all over this country, they're the ones who are nervous, like, am I really going to put in a big plant in this country with these giant deficits? I mean, am I going to get a return on capital when they keep changing the regulations? What if I locate in this state with all the new regulations they have? On and on. That's what goes through business people's minds. The uncertainty created by the Federal Reserve, it would have been so much better to blow out this recession. We've had the weakest recovery of all time. And so they're just happy the stock market's going up and looking for silly reasons to be on TV about, I suppose. But where's the serious nature of people who want to fix this problem in our government? I mean, I got document after document here. There's very few. We'll come back and talk about some of them after this next break. In fact, we'll come back and talk about David Stockman, who is one of the very few, former budget director. We'll talk about him a lot in the next section and what the Cato people are saying and so forth, and some of the serious people. But so far, we've got a bunch of unserious people laughing and joking, complimenting each other, $22 billion of fictitious savings in a $3.7 trillion per year budget. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We're glad you're listening at LaffeyRadio.com, and put it on tonight. You can tell your friend, just go to the app, hit one button, listen to the show as you're driving home tonight or into work tomorrow morning. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
Well, I finally did it. I opened a 401k. What? Why? Just wait for the inheritance. We've definitely got a rich uncle somewhere. We're one call away from the winner's circle at the Derby, dinners with multiple forks, a vacation home in the country, using summer as a verb.
You don't actually think that, do you?
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind. Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs, the Rhode Island Society of CPAs, and the Ad Council.
When I have an asthma attack, I feel scared. It's like tiny nails in the air poke my lungs. I start to cough. Sometimes my parents have to take me to the hospital.
Today, 1 out of 13 children suffer from some form of asthma, accounting for nearly 1/3 of all emergency room visits.
I feel like I'm choking. It's kind of like an elephant is on my chest. A little whistle sound comes out when I breathe.
But while your child may suffer from asthma doesn't have to make your child suffer. There are simple ways you can prevent your child's next attack. To learn more, log on to www.noattacks.org or call your doctor, because even one attack is one too many.
I feel like a fish with no water.
Brought to you by the EPA, the Ad Council, and this station.
I am an American soldier.
I'm a warrior and a member of a team.
I serve the people of the United States and live the Army values.
I will always place mission first.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never quit.
I will never leave a fallen comrade.
I am disciplined.
I am disciplined.
Physically and mentally tough.
Trained and proficient in my warrior tasks and drills.
I always maintain my arms, my equipment, and myself.
I am an expert and I am a professional.
I stand ready to deploy, engage, and destroy the
enemies of the United States of America in close combat.
I am a guardian of freedom and the American way of life.
I am an American soldier.
I am an American soldier.
I am an American soldier.
There's strong, and there's Army strong. See what it takes at GoArmy.com.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
I think it's amazing, first of all, that we had Mr. Stockman slated for today. How appropriate. All right, if ever I had a guy, you're my budget guy, tell me your impressions after combing through some of the numbers of what has been put forth by both parties yet to be voted on.
Well, first, let's be clear. It's a joke and a betrayal. It's the final surrender of the House Republican leadership to beltway politics and to kicking the can and ignoring this budget monster that's hurtling down the road. They're busting the caps, and it's totally unnecessary. It's going to add $70 billion to spending this year and next year, and then they're going to pretend to save it in 22 and 23 way down the road. They've not only kicked the can down the road, they've kicked it into low Earth orbit.
That's David Stockman, the former budget director for Ronald Reagan back in, I think he was in his late 30s. He was a congressman out of Michigan. He knows the budget. He's got a giant book out, which I've read a couple pages out that I've got to go finish reading. Not finish. I got to start reading. It's a long, lengthy tome. But there's Stockman talking about the budget being a joke and a betrayal, and it is a joke and a betrayal. And we heartily agree with David Stockman. We need him to be the budget director. We need adults. That's what we're missing. We're missing adults who can level with the American people. Whether the American people want to hear it or not, I don't know. I hope they do. I think they do. And from traveling the country, I pretty much know they do. But I know that they feel hopeless. Like, what are they going to do about this? I mean, today we're hearing about Obama's PAC is changing into a Hillary Clinton PAC with, hundreds of millions of dollars. So people are sitting there in Nebraska saying, what am I going to do about this? But people are trying. But Steve Laffey here, we're talking about the budget and this budget deal that happened. And it's even worse because that interview was done with Rick Santelli on CNBC. And I love watching Rick Santelli. He's the only guy I actually will watch, basically I find out where he's on. He has great interviews with people like David Stockman, and we'll play some more clips. But I've gone through in the first couple of sections of this show sort of what's in this budget deal, not line by line, but item by item, how ludicrous it is, how we've watched Congressman Ryan, and you've heard other people talk about it's a step in the right direction, it's what they could agree upon. And then you say to yourself just a couple of things. Here's a great op-ed from Investors Business Daily. It talks about it. They talk about what they could agree upon. And we've said it's about raising taxes on airlines and fictitious revenue, basically in 2022 and 2023. That's what they could agree upon. But we know that, for example, Tom Coburn, and we've talked about on the show, Republican out of Oklahoma, that we know we spent $125,000 on 3D pizza efforts. NASA spent $3 million on space-age studies to show how Congress works. $390,000 on YouTube cartoons about global warming. The National Institute of Health spent $325,000 grant to determine that wives would be happy if they calmed down faster during an argument. Transportation Department spent $500,000 tidying up one block of Rossville, Kansas. That's the town of 1,500 residents. $3.5 million installing solar panels in Manchester Boston Airport, a quarter of which had to be covered up because the glare they caused was blinding pilots. I didn't read this. What? They spent $300 million in the Army to build a blimp that didn't work. Two different departments of Homeland Security poured $30 million into two IT projects that both support immigration enforcement. Coburn Kemp with $30 billion a year in waste. They didn't agree on any of that. And it's worse. It's worse than anything anybody has said so far, because they said it mostly in late December, because now it's January. And that's why we waited to talk to you about this, because it didn't take 2 years for them to try to switch up the budget. It took them 2 weeks. You remember that Nancy Pelosi was talking about embrace the suck is a term she wouldn't say again, but she said to her people that go vote for this budget deal, because she mentions that it didn't include extending unemployment benefits. So now, literally now, this week, 2 weeks after the budget deal was cut, what are they doing? Well, they just voted. They voted for a new budget, or to start the process for a new budget. 6 Republican senators, and we should name them: Kelly Ayotte, Dan Coates, Susan Collins, Dean Healer of Nevada, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and Portman of Iowa, broke away from Republican leaders. This is in the Senate. They cleared the way for a vote on extending long-term unemployment benefits for 3 months, and then wrestled over how to fund it. That's not part of the budget. When they did this budget 2 weeks ago, it was supposed to be put away until October of 2015. That was the budget. They go home over break. People in high unemployment states are like screaming at them, some constituents. So they got 60 votes, and now they're gonna try to overdo part of the budget in 2 weeks. Not 2 years, not 2 months, in 2 weeks. This is why the whole thing. And so does anybody believe that in 2022 and 2023 there'll be a new sequestration that will get about $40 billion back? Nobody believes that. Not you, not me, not the people who did it. That's how far removed they are from reality. And even, by the way, it's like a guy in Fixing America, the movie, my buddy out of Newport, is that it's so much smoke and mirrors. They don't care what they say. They just don't care what they say. They know it's a big lie. They know it's going to be a lie in a week. And they simply don't care what they say. So they just say it. We're done with the budget. Go home for Christmas. And the newspapers, none of the articles that I have, none of them say, headline is like, what are they doing? Exclamation point. Budget deal a joke. Already being broken would be the headline if I ran a newspaper. Instead, the headline's on jobless aid bill advances in the Senate, as if there was no jobless aid in the budget. No decision on the jobless aid. By the way, I'm not done. That was number one. January 7th. That's yesterday. Lawmakers seek to repeal benefit cut for military retirees. All right, let's go through this. We just went through some of the money that would be saved by taking 1% cost of living adjustment away from retirees from the active military until they reach 62, when it would be reinstated. That was part of the deal. All I watched, especially on Fox News, was military people and their wives getting up on TV. I thought it was back in my city council meeting. And this is not a popular thing to say, by the way. And I love the military. But I thought it was sort of disgraceful. Everybody should be getting up and saying, If I've got to suck it up a little bit, everybody should. If I'm going to do it here in this pension plan, why are we not taking away a 1% cost of living adjustment in Social Security? Why aren't we doing something to Medicare or Medicaid to make the adjustment so that people who are eligible either a year older or have a little bit less money than we set it up for in the States? Why isn't everybody doing something to help our children so the nation doesn't totally tank as interest rates are starting to at least normalize? And we've been over this before. When they start to normalize, we've got $7 trillion more of debt on the $17 trillion we have scheduled till 2020 something, depending on what you believe in the numbers. If we borrow $20 trillion at the average of the last 30 years, or 1% lower, it's $1 trillion in interest costs versus the $220 billion today. It's $800 billion more. So if you say there's going to be an $800 billion deficit that year, it's going to be $1.6 trillion, like we had in the depths of this recession. Is the Fed ever going to stop purchasing assets? What do you think is going to happen? So the next part is right here. Lawmakers seek to repeal benefit cut for military retirees. This is the law that was passed. So they're going to try to change that. And there's a great op-ed here that I go through to talk to you about how, and this is nothing against the military. People serve our country, and we have to change this around dramatically for the veterans, especially the veterans who fought in active wars. We can't let them go to the Veterans Administration anymore. They're getting terrible service. We've got to get them much better service. But everybody's going to have to participate in fixing America. Everybody, retired military people, people on Social Security, everybody's got to help. And what's happening into our military today is that so much costs are going into pension benefits and salaries and so forth. We understand we raised military benefits and salaries to get people to come fight after 2001. But the larger issue, it says here, is the Pentagon's personnel cost. Pensions as well as salaries and health care benefits have ballooned since 9/11. After the Clinton-era defense drawdown, the U.S. understandably improved benefits to attract people to fight. Okay, we get that. But if you look at what's happened over the last decade, the cost to taxpayer for each active service member has gone up 41% in inflation-adjusted dollars. We're spending now literally 10% of the entire defense budget to pay pensions. A tenth of its budget is to pay pensions to 2.3 million retirees and their survivors. We're not going to be able to keep doing that. How are we going to buy tanks? How are we going to make sure that the guys who are fighting have the best equipment? We're going to head back into a Jimmy Carter type situation where we had people out there where their planes were going down. So, by the way, it talks here about Europe and how Europe is really, of course, they have us to defend them, but the Europeans have taken the same road to military decline. Their armed forces have become another bloated appendage of the welfare state. We don't want that in our military. We want a lean, mean, fighting machine of young people who are out there defending our country. 20 of NATO's 27 members spend more than half their defense budgets on personnel, leaving little money for readiness, except we take care of it, I guess. The U.S., we're at 33%, and about 50% if you include civilian Pentagon personnel, and we're headed up. So here's Congressman Ryan and Murray, by the way, who we decided on a budget. Now they agreed to support the technical fix and restore the full COLA. So where's the savings? Whatever savings there were there are now going to go away. And who's, by the way, the two Democratic senators out of Virginia with all those defense contractors right there. They're the ones, are the biggest ones supporting this change. They voted for the budget, knowing that 2 weeks later they would come in and try to change it. So I'm sorry, Miss Noonan, Peggy Noonan, who wrote A Small Step in the Right Direction. It's a disastrous step. It really is, as we saw, and we'll hear some more clips. We'll play a lot in the last segment here. It really is, as David Stockman says, it's worse than kicking the can down the road. There's the road's over. We can see the cliff. They kicked it off the cliff. They just don't care. We're back. Time's going fast. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. Be right back after the next break.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
The call to serve. It has no sound, yet I have heard it in the whispered retelling of honorable sacrifices made by those who have served before me. The call to serve has no form, yet I have clearly seen it in the eyes of men and women infinitely more courageous and more driven than most. The call to serve has no weight, yet I have held it in my hands. I will commit to carry it close to my heart until my country is safe and the anguish of those less fortunate has been soothed. The call to serve is at once invisible and always present. And for those who choose to answer the call, for their country, for their fellow man, for themselves, it is the most powerful force on earth. America's Navy, a global force for good.
Students, when I call the reason for your absences throughout the years, please exit the auditorium without your high school diploma. Too tired, family trip, sick day, starting the holidays early.
Starting in the 6th grade, students who miss 18 days or more of school in a year for any reason will fall behind and risk not graduating high school. How many days of school has your child missed this year? Absences add up. Keep track at boostattendance.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Army and the Ad Council.
I'm in almost every school bus and classroom. I go to school with your children. We say the Pledge of Allegiance together. You see me around the neighborhood and you tell me that I'm a pretty good kid. Well, I'm one out of every 5 children in America, and I'm struggling with hunger. This problem is closer than you think. My teacher tells me we can grow up to be whatever we want. I want to grow up to be someone who doesn't go to bed hungry. There's enough food in this country to feed everybody.
Please visit feedingamerica.org today and find your local food bank for ways to help.
Every dollar you donate helps provide 8 meals for kids like me, quietly struggling with hunger. Together, we are Feeding America, brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
I understand that there are many of my colleagues on this side of the aisle that are very unhappy with this deal and intend to vote against it. My only response to that is I respect their vote, but I'd like to know what we do in order to avoid another shutdown of the government. The American people steadfastly reject a shutdown of the government. So I have concerns about the budget deal. Everybody, I think, does because the nature of the way business is done. But to somehow vote against it without an alternative to keep the budget, to keep the government from shutting down, then I think lacks some intellectual integrity.
Gosh, this is Senator John McCain, who was one of the people who voted for the budget. And he's talking about intellectual integrity. Where's the intellectual integrity of this budget that we've gone through? There are no savings. There's bigger deficits. All on the backs of our children. All with him knowing that the country's going to blow up over higher interest rates. He knows it. He's no dummy. And by the way, it goes back to the Ted Cruz group who didn't have the votes, who didn't get the votes in the Senate, made the House end up start shutting the government down, which led to this budget deal because the Republicans are afraid of another government shutdown, rather than, when they were shut down, getting something. If you had to get there, get something out of it, which they wouldn't do. They got nothing out of it. They post, by the way, we got soon to do a show about the coming deficit cap, which they put off until February 7th. Didn't even put a limit on it, looks like. And they're just going to start talking about December 7th. And now Secretary Treasurer Lou is talking about he has till about March until we go off another cliff. So how about everybody just getting their act together? I mean, and by the way, it gets to the point where listen to his Boehner, Majority Leader of the U.S. House, just going off on basically quote unquote right wing groups. Listen to this.
Statements blasting this deal. Are you worried?
You mean the groups that came out and opposed it before they ever saw it?
Yes, those groups. Are you worried that
they're using our members and they're using the American people for their own goals? This is ridiculous. Listen, if you're for more deficit reduction, you're for this agreement.
But there's no deficit reduction in the budget. Who's he talking about using? He's talking about groups. All groups go to their elected officials and try to get them to do what they want. Which groups is he talking about? I mean, he sounds like off kilter in this comment. It's so out of control. But he must know that there are no deficit reductions in this. We're scheduled to run $700 billion plus deficits for 10 straight years right now. And he's the majority leader. He's the majority leader that helped engineer the government shutdown and now this budget deal that he okayed and told his guys to vote for. But it gets worse. I mean, listen to Harry Reid. This is the Senate majority leader. So full of it.
Here we have a situation where Paul Ryan, Republican nominee for vice president, chairman of the Budget Committee, worked over a period of many weeks with Patty Murray, the chair of our Budget Committee. And they did what we always used to do in the Congress. They both have fixed ideas. They are both very, very good legislators. They don't agree on much. But that's how it used to be. And we would work together and compromise.
They're very good legislators? And that's how it used to be, and they'd compromise? Listen again, here's Paul Ryan and his comments after. You heard him at the beginning. Hear him again.
That means to me a budget agreement that reduces the deficit without raising taxes and replaces some of the arbitrary across-the-board spending cuts with smarter, permanent reforms that pay for this relief. The House budget reflects our ultimate goals. It balances the budget within 10 years, it pays off the debt, but I realize that is not going to pass in this divided government. I see this as agreement as a step in the right direction. Instead of the arbitrary cuts, we make smart, targeted reforms. We eliminate waste. We stop sending checks to criminals. We cut corporate welfare. We reform some mandatory programs. And we start to make real reforms to these autopilot programs that are the drivers of our debt in the first place. I think this agreement is a clear improvement on the status quo. This agreement makes sure that we don't have a government shutdown scenario in January. It makes sure that we don't have another government shutdown scenario in October. It makes sure that we don't lurch from crisis to crisis. It also allows Congress to finally exercise the power of the purse. We're both from the legislative branch. The Constitution says that the legislative branch should exercise the power of the purse. We want to reclaim that from the administration instead of having all of these continuing resolutions.
You don't even know what to say. First of all, he talks about the deficit, slowing the deficit without raising taxes, but they do raise taxes in here. By the way, what about this part about stop sending checks to criminals? Can you just stop sending some checks to criminals anyway? Does that need to be part of the new budget? And by the way, it's over here. I'll read it a little bit to you. Ludicrous what he's coming up with. They're going to improve the collection of unemployment insurance overpayments. Provision expands the use of the Treasury offset program to all states so they can recover certain unemployment insurance debts, such as overpayments because of fraud or failure to report earnings that will save $69 million, $6.9 million per year. Now we're talking millions. That's one of his talking points in a $3.7 trillion budget. This is what he wants you to vote for? This is what he's so happy about? No, he doesn't want the government to be shut down again because they fell into that trap before for their own making. And that's all it's about. It's all about we're going to attack President Obama on Obamacare this year, and so we're going to avoid a government shutdown, and we'll deal with it some other time in the future. And the real risk is that when we start to deal with it, it's too late. Greece has been, by the way, just so you know, some statistics from overseas today. They're big, huge positives. Ireland's got its unemployment rate down to 12.5%. They're out of the woods. I mean, unemployment in Europe is down to 12 something. But when they blew up, that they can't get it back. Europe can't get it back. Greece is out of control. It's not coming back. Unless they leave the euro. If they have any sense, they'll leave the euro. A whole nother story. But Ryan is out of control here. He is totally thrown in the towel. First of all, forget about him on Brit Hume when he's running for vice president, not wanting to tell Brit Hume at Fox News when he would balance the budget, which was in 30 years, using overly, about the 10-year one that he talks about here that they reject, using overly aggressive assumptions on both growth and cuts. These people are a joke. I mean, might be a great guy. A joke now. Total joke. Let's go back to Stockman, because here's a guy who had some common sense. Here's some more on Stockman about what he thinks about it, and I'm totally in agreement
Now,
with
when we talk about kicking the timeline, David, we're not talking about kicking it just maybe till the midterms. Why don't you tell the audience, in your opinion, exactly what this timeline really is?
Yeah, that's the thing. When you take a 2-year vacation on the fiscal budget, and that's what they're doing, locking it in through October 1, 2015, the end of fiscal 2015. A few weeks later is the Iowa straw poll. Both parties will be going hammer and tong into the presidential election. Open primaries in both parties, no incumbent. There's not a chance anything will be done about the fiscal equation, which is festering, until 2017. And if you get around to addressing it, you can't have an impact till 2018 or 2019. Now, who thinks we can wait that long? We have $17 trillion of debt now. Just by the momentum built in, it'll be $25 trillion after the next presidential election. When interest rates normalize, there's going to be an explosion of debt service payments. And what do we have? We have Paul Ryan, the alleged great conservative warrior, throwing in the towel and saying we're going to do nothing for the next 2 years except break the caps. Now, all of these offsets aren't real, and even the ones that are, like pension contribution reductions, should be put into deficit cutting, not into additional spending.
Yeah, you have it. There's David Stockman. I mean, he's got it. I couldn't find a guy I agree with more. He understands what's going on. Adults, I hate to keep using this word, but I have 6 kids, and I know, I watched them grow up. My 24-year-old's now an adult, handles himself like an adult. Teenagers are still teenagers, the little kids are just little kids. My little kid came in today, wanted, if he could get 45 math problems right, could he get $20? I'm like, sure. He can't get them. He doesn't get, make him too hard. He can't get them all right, so he doesn't get $20. And so he's always disappointed. But he comes back for more, but he's a kid. Right? He doesn't know that. He doesn't have to understand this stuff. He doesn't understand it the way adults do. But we now understand that they have lost control. That the National Republican Party, I've been a Republican for a long time, has lost control and is not willing to fight. They're not willing to go out there and fight. 169 to 69 among House members are not willing to go out there and fight. And what Stockman says is going back. This will be. And I've even gone farther. That clip was a couple of weeks ago. But we now know that they're not even going to stick to what they did 2 weeks ago. None of them. Not Nancy Pelosi, not Paul Ryan, not John Boehner, not Senator McCain. They're going to find a way to increase spending and just pray, I guess, that they get out of office before the whole thing blows up. And it will. It has to. Mathematically, it just has to. Unless you're Paul Krugman at the New York Times, and I guess you can just talk about deficits forever. At some point, we've got to be adults. The purpose of this show was to really point out the budget that they put together and what an absolute joke it was and how unbelievable that they can get in front of cameras and have reporters, any reporters, not either double over with laughter or have these serious questions for them. Because they didn't. They just went home to Christmas, and that's why it's another TV show coming this week. And the TV show this week is how they're going to, without even saying it, do away with the budget within 2 weeks, both on unemployment, extensions that they're going to try to get through, and with pensions that they weren't going to do. Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We'll be back tomorrow with another hard-hitting show. We appreciate listening at LaffeyRadio.com. God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Steve Laffey's Fixing America radio program on the Laffey Radio Network. Fixing America is broadcast Monday through Friday afternoons at 3 p.m. right here at www.laffeyradio.com. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or account of this broadcast without the express written consent of Laffey Network, LLC is prohibited.